Hello, good morning, and welcome to NewsFile. This is your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on NewsFile, as you know, we put Ghana first. The man who's dominated the most parts of Ghana's political history and is the founder of the Fourth Republic, the most enduring regime, democratic regime, Jerry John Rawlings. A legend goes home. We'll take a peek into his legacy. The coronavirus scourge, as we understand, there appear to be new threats as there is a surge here in Ghana. There's a threat to children, reports of children getting infected. There's also the story about erectile dysfunction. How true is that? And exactly how does hydrogen peroxide do anything in protecting you against coronavirus? Of course, we have the election petition. The petitioner had motions that were lost. It lost almost everything that it put forward before the court. It put its witness in the box. It's trying to make its case for the petitioner. But what are the problems with the witness and the witness statement that has suffered expulsion? Some 7 paragraphs have suffered expunging, either in whole or in parts. We'll be right back to deal with the vexed matters. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on NewsFile, as you know, we put Ghana first. On a Yanini legal light, I say stop spreading COVID-19. Now, the danger becoming alarming is that there are people who have come into contact with people who are infected, or people who may be aware that they are infected. But because they are not in public health facilities, may be spreading COVID-19. Some people have complained at workplaces about persons who know that they have COVID-19 and yet appear to have remained at work. It's becoming a major concern. We had a CAP 86, a Towns Act. It's a law that we made in this country that prohibited persons who, while suffering from a dangerous infectious disorder, but willfully expose persons without proper precaution against spreading the disorder in a street, in a public place, in a shop, in an inn, or a public conveyance, or that you are in charge of a person who is suffering and you expose the sufferer, or you give, you lend, you sell, you transmit, or expose without previous disinfection that is needed to avoid infecting other people. You are liable to the sanction of 24,000 Ghana cedis. We passed the Public Health Act 2012, and we appear to have repealed this law. So, the law now mandates that the state will ensure that you are isolated, because we also have an EI that mandates mandatory isolation if you are infected. And contact tracing has to happen. Now, because the contact tracing is not happening as expected, and the health director, Ghana Health Service Director, advised that once you have somebody who is infected or something, or you suspect that you have it, begin to caution yourself and isolate yourself even before you get tested. Some people don't appear to want to work with this. If you violate the mandatory isolation provisions of the law, you are subject to be punished. And under Section 11 of the Public Health Act, you are likely to suffer even imprisonment for about 3 months. Please, let's all be cautious at a time when COVID is rising rather high in this country, to protect not only ourselves, but to protect others too. That's your legal light. Now we are going to begin with talking about the former president, like I said earlier, the founder of the Fourth Republic, and which is the most enduring republic that Ghana has enjoyed as a democracy. We will be speaking to people who are close to him, who were close to him, and those who followed the era since May 1979 and to June 4, 79 of the AFRC, to September 1979 and the years that followed. 31st December 1981 and the democratic era as a civilian president. What has been his achievements that are worth celebrating? I'm sure you observed some of that in the tributes that poured when he was being laid to rest. Let's first get on the phone lines and speak to a man who was his aide for so many years. All right, so let's first listen and watch this.
Rawlings, who read the tribute on behalf of her mother, said the late president's gifts of sharing knew no bounds.
With the birth of our first child, your care and concern knew no bounds, as you would spend all morning cleaning the house and doing all manner of chores before setting off for work, so I could rest and see to the baby. You took pride in your fatherly duties. There was no task too tiresome or bothersome for you, as you sought to take care of your young family. The scarcity of goods in the country at the time made things so difficult for everyone, and so you decided to name our daughter Zaneto, which meant, let the darkness end. The next few months had me in a constant state of fear, as you were arrested countless times by the military intelligence, culminating in the historic trial after the May 15th uprising. Life after June 4th, 1979 was never laid back. It was a roller coaster, and to quote Iris Hailsden, but then our path grew steep and rough and clouds obscured the sun. As problems raised their worried heads, we indeed lost our sense of fun. But love was there through troubled times to ease the hurt away.
So that's an excerpt from the final funeral rites and burial of President Jerry John Rawlings. Let's get on the phone lines and speak to start with Kofi Adams. Kofi Adams was his aide for so many years. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, Kofi.
Thompson, and good morning to your listeners and viewers.
Right. And Kofi Adams is now the MP for the Boem constituency. Now, for how many years were you aide to President Rawlings?
Let me just cut it to the senior aide level. When I was his spokesperson, that was 8+ years.
Right. What is it that you can say about the man Rawlings and his legacy, having worked so close with him?
I must say something, that President Rawlings was truly a complete man when it comes to legacy. He had a legacy for family. There's a legacy for friends and comrades, and there's legacy for the country. In all spheres, you will find President Rawlings in there. That he is not limited in any way to just family, to just friends, or to country. You find him everywhere that he has left a mark. And clearly, if we want to look at it from very national perspective, whether we accept it or not, no matter how much we will try to turn around and say, the fourth Republican constitutional democracy that we have today as a country will very much be credited to him, as we do for Nkrumah, for our independence. We will credit Jerry Rawlings for the fourth Republican constitutional democracy that we have today. That is the first thing we can look at if we want to look at the national perspective. Then below that,
well, Kofi, to have even President Akufo-Addo say without any hesitation that Jerry Rawlings is the founder of the Fourth Republic, that's it. But give us a bit of a peek into who you knew him to be before we move on to the issues of monuments that will stand in his name as legacy.
Thank you, Samson. You see, one clear thing that people didn't know about President Rawlings, which most of us who were close to him knew, is his love for nature and environment. That translated to his love for mankind. And as I start most times to analyze the man Rawlings and why he loves people the way he does, then answers kept popping up that look at how he loves nature, how he loves the environment. Truly, we are told God created nature and environment for the goodness of mankind. He did all these beautiful things, the mountains, the water body, the trees, the animals, all those things. He did them to make the life of mankind so beautiful. And so if you have a human being who loves such things, then you can immediately see his love for mankind. So President Rawlings was one person who got moved by pain. He truly would never want to see people going through pain. And so you can now appreciate why long before he got to the scene, he will name the first daughter Zaneto. So you can now go into and see the belief. People today, now that he's gone, will take their time and understand some of the things that he did. Zaneto, there was something happening at that time. He thought that it must stop. What will be his contribution to keeping that in his mind constantly is to name the first child. So that even within their small home environment, he is very much informed that something that is going bad, that is wrong, must stop. That is what moved him all through his work, whether as chairman of PNDC, as leader of NDC and president of the Republic, and post his tenure as a former president and, of course, an elder statesman. He never minced words when he has to speak about anything that is wrong. Whether something, it even affected his own organization, the NDC. That is not what he's looking at. He's looking at what I'm speaking. Is it true? Will it help uplift the nation? Will he pull us closer to values that gives respect to human being, whether old or young, to human being, human nature? Will we do good and right to ourselves and our country? That is what informed him.
Yeah.
Not whether I am this or I am that.
People said he was your very tough man, and clearly it is seen through some of his actions in running the country for almost 20 good years. How he came onto the scene in 1979, some of us didn't have the privilege of getting to experience the period. By then, I think I was just about some 3-4 years. But in 2010, when he was a AU envoy to Somalia, and there was famine in Somalia, which was declared by the UN, as an emergency situation, he was speaking to the CNN about it. He had gone there himself to see how the Somalis were suffering, how children, were stunted, and he, in that interview with the CNN, the global news network, broke down and was weeping. That day, I felt it, that there's a human side to him. We have heard, is it Victor Smith? We are being told somebody who was very close to him says that he had witnessed him crying like a baby. From where you sit, looking at it through this lens, what would you say of him? Was he, as some may have thought, that he may have been reckless or heartless to some extent in some of the things that he's perceived to have been the way he did some of the things he did?
Thompson, thank you for some of these issues that you brought up. The Somalia incident that you mentioned was things that happened in my presence, because at that time I was his spokesperson. Okay. Myself and Kobnando were the ones who were managing the Somalia project. And long before him, others who have been appointed to try to assist in such situations will want to stay away. But President Rawlings insisted that if he has to do anything to help in the situation, he needed to be on the ground. He didn't fear that it could result in him being killed going to that level. All he wanted was to be able to assess the situation himself. Let those who are engaged in that have a certain feel and see if we can get them to reach some kind of consensus. He wanted to meet the political actors. He wanted to meet the women groups. He wanted to meet the traditional leaders. He wanted to meet them separately and bring them together on the ground, not only away from Somalia. And I believe that at the end of the day, he made very strong recommendations to AU that, to a large extent, have helped, if not completely, resolve the situation in reaching this far that we have reached with the Somalia situation. President Rawlings has been accused for many things. And for some of them, if you ask, they will tell you, oh, soldiers came and did this. Soldiers came and did that. It is true that when you have a revolution such as we had in 81 and even before then, the AFRC, some people will take the law into their own hands. Today, even in our constitutional democratic dispensation, we have situations where people take the law into their own hands. But thank God for social media and other means of communicating, sometimes we are able to capture some of these incidents and report them. So it enables the leadership to immediately follow up. But you can imagine in 79, you can imagine in 81, 82, 83, how are you going to even capture an incident for it to be able to reach the leadership, for them to react or act almost immediately? Sometimes it may not even be known to leadership for a very long time to come. Instances that came to his attention. Just look at how many of them were investigated and dealt with. Mention of the murder of the judges and then the army officer. This was immediately investigated. People who at least were found guilty faced the maximum punishment, including someone who supposed to have been so close to him that at that time he would have thought, like, let me save even the person, if truly he really wished to do so. But
if you could,
the maximum punishment.
Kofi, if you could at this time tell us in summary what you would say are his biggest legacies. And whilst we talk about legacies, of course, people will be pointing to rural electrification and all of that. If there's anything beyond a monument that you can call a legacy, and also beyond the Fourth Republic, please, quickly, let's talk about that.
I think, Samson, those things of monuments, infrastructure, and all that are things we can all see and raise. But for me, one thing I would always remember him for is the empathy that he had for fellow beings, and the fact that he taught us never to shy away from speaking truth and speaking to power where we have to. For me, these are things that really ring in my mind. As for the big things about whether it is healthcare infrastructure, whether it is laws that tackle some major infractions in our society, like, for example, the interstate succession laws that were passed during the PNDC time to save many of our women and children, where if you lost your father or your husband without any will, the next moment is that you are even thrown away. Kids' education nil. That law came to save a lot of persons. Those things are there. We will see them. Extension of water to many communities, eradication of all kinds of water-related diseases, educational infrastructure, educational reforms that made education so accessible to people, even in communities where they would not have thought of sending their kids to secondary education. All those things are there. But the intangibles that he made us feel that we can challenge, we can believe in this, let's stand for truth, that you can serve as a leader for so long and still live in your country without running away to any place.
Okay.
You can serve as a leader, and when it is time for you to bow out, you don't need to do anything to stay on. 52 years old, he left office and stayed here till he's dead.
All right.
52. Many would have amended the constitution to stay on.
Right. Anyway, he himself acknowledged that anybody who thought that he had any idea to stay on for a day longer after his 8-year tenure had come, they were wrong, because he knew,
was completely wrong.
Yeah, he said he knew clearly that anything like that would have meant he would lose the support
of
the people.
All the institutions he has helped build over the period.
All right.
We're building a democracy. Would have been destroyed by just that action.
Right. Well, despite the fact that he was, people will say, a reluctant Democrat, he was very clear about it from the very start. There are some older people who get to tell us stories about the time he came on the scene, and how when he was court-martialed on the 15th of May, 1979, the opportunity where he spoke about the fact that he was not an expert in law, he was not an expert in economy, but he was an expert in walking hungry and thinking about the next meal. People have told us stories about that time, how you would find only one single person in an entire market being the only person who has control and charge over
many commodities.
Yes, over Gary, common Gary. There are those who have told the stories where you couldn't find even soap. You know, you couldn't find toothpaste. So I suppose that there are many who recognize all of these. Thank you for your time, Kofi Adams.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Right. Now, let's speak to Colonel Festus B. Abuaje, retired, who is author, conflict analyst, consultant, and adjunct member, Center on Democratic Transitions, Ghana. Thank you very much for joining us, Colonel Abuaje. I think you need to unmute.
Thanks for having me, and my compliments to the panelists in the studio.
Right. Thank you very much.
Who just spoke.
Right.
That I've never met in life, but I've heard so much about.
Yes. I remember those days we heard him speak and people kept saying, how does this guy manage to speak for President Rawlings? He's difficult to manage. He and Victor Smith. I remember how Victor Smith got sacked by, is it his own text message? You know, very interesting times. But what do you remember of Jerry Rawlings, and what would you want him to be remembered for?
Well, I think a lot has been said across several disciplines: the economy, the politics, human relations, international relations, and so on and so forth. But not much, I believe, has been discussed about his role and contribution across different dimensions or levels of security. That's what I think I want to touch on. Well, the man that we call JJ or JJ Rawlings, I think will be stuck in everybody's mind to start with. In theory, he was a coup maker. In our history as a nation, he's about the only one who has not come once, not twice, but if you like, 3 times, and stayed on during the 3rd time for as long as, you know, the conditions allowed. And I think that is the basis from which we need to discuss his contribution. Many of us who are alive, I heard you say that you were quite a young boy. But when I had returned from the Middle East in 1979, or let's say 1981, the soldiers of 2BN said that, in fact, there were a number of officers who were not wanted in their units by soldiers. And I happened to be one of them who was not wanted by the soldiers of 2BN. So I was posted away to Kumasi, where we used to have the boys' company or the junior leaders' company as an instructor. That school is no more. Jerry had the courage to use our military term to under-implement that school, because a lot of the difficulties that he had, granted that he was a coup maker, once his coup had succeeded, it had become legitimate. But there were a number of attempts, counter-coups and counter-revolutions to get rid of him. And some of the elements involved were fine boys, fine soldiers. The boys' company, you took boys at the age of about 14 and a half, took them to the school, grilled them in military discipline for 3 years. So at the age of about 17 and a half, you turned them out. And the best amongst them were graduated as lance corporals. But some of the very fine senior NCOs that the Ghana Armed Forces has produced came from that school. Unfortunately, or incidentally, they were also the activists within, among his own group, and then against his group. He had the courage to under-implement the school, close it down. And since then, we have one policy which says that every soldier entering the Ghana Armed Forces must go through the Armed Forces Recruit and Training Center, which is currently at Shah Hills. And I think that must go to his credit. But I should mention here that, you see, a lot has been said about him, but you've mentioned Ambassador Victor Smith. We've just heard Mr. Kofi Adams, and I saw on another platform, E.T. Menson. In the domain that I want to talk about, the successes that he achieved owe to how he imaginatively, synergized the relations or the synergies between security, be it national or domestic, be it regional, be it international, and foreign policy. And here, the team that I think many of us would remember is a gentleman that we hardly hear about these days, but he's still alive. Captain Kojo Chikata. I mean, a name that, instilled fear in some of us or many of us, and at the same time, commanded your respect. That deep thinking, gentleman. And of course, General Nodkwenu, that some Ghanaians, for whatever reasons, have not sat down to analyze the circumstances in which he found himself in the middle of these coups and so on. Then, of course, on the foreign relations side, the Honorable Obed Asamoah, for instance, Ambassador Victor Gbeho. Then my own senior at Prempeh College, Commander Asasi Jima. And I think we shouldn't forget about Mr. Totobi Kwachi. And another name that these days we don't hear much about, Michael Susidis, that I met only once when I launched my ECOMOG book in 2018. Okay. And of course, I should mention W1 Tete. Some, if not all, the successes that he achieved arose from, in the domain of security and its relations with international politics and so on, from these people that I've mentioned. I think Rawlings has already gone down in history, by masterfully being able to blend, as I've said, domestic security, regional security, and the management of complex humanitarian emergencies, whether in Ghana as we had it in the early 80s, when the economy was in dire straits, when you needed to queue over days in order to find a gallon of fuel, of course, which was being rationed. And then the regional, conflicts that were raging in the ECOWAS region. I think how he successfully managed to contain the counter-coups must also go down in history. Because here he was contending with very powerful players in the international community. And there are records, Obed Asamoah has mentioned that in his books, The Political History of Ghana, the involvement of the CIA, the MI6, and France, and Israel, and so on and so forth, were behind the series of coups and counter-coups that he was able to contain. And of course, we need to mention that CIA, France, US, whatever, don't fly drones into Ghana. They need conduits. They need safe havens. At the time, all our neighbors, without exception, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, were in the camp of these foreign actors in order to get rid of the Rawlings regime that they rightly, with their masters in the international community, thought that was a threat, if you like, to democracy and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, I think it's just been said, we must credit J.J. Rawlings with the kind of democratic consolidation that we keep touting that we have achieved over 28 years.
Yeah, beyond the shores of Ghana, I have heard international security experts talk about a role that he played beyond Ghana. But are you in a position to help us appreciate that a bit also? We remember that he was made chairman of ECOWAS for at least 2 years. Is that what they mean when they say that he had a role in peace building in Africa or within the sub-region more particularly?
So we start with Liberia, where, compliments of Charles Taylor, the country descended into a very long civil war from December, in fact, Christmas Day, eve of Christmas 1989, Now, at the time, you would know that the PNDC was still in power. Unfortunately, this was at a time when he was under pressure to transition from revolution to democracy. Now, because of the economic constraints that I have alluded to, the Ghana Armed Forces were not very well endowed. And yet he managed, together with Nigeria, together with the Gambia, whose leader, Jawara, that's right, was the chair of ECOWAS at the time, to mobilize what became known as ECOMOG, to intervene with or without Charles Taylor's consent. They thought at the time that it was, of course, the pretext was that Ghana was going to evacuate Ghanaian citizens, and therefore the grounds was humanitarian. But of course, in the absence of a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities or peace agreement, Ghana and ECOMOG ended up undertaking a peace enforcement role. And in spite of many challenges, including difficulties with Nigeria, Ghana still stuck with ECOMOG until his chairmanship of ECOWAS, 1994. Now, 1994 is very, very critical. And I think Obeda Samoa has explained that in his book that I've mentioned. Ghana all along, subscribed to the doctrine of engaging with the players in Liberia to find an exit centered on elections. And Nigeria's approach was to use the military option in order to defeat Charles Taylor on the battlefield. It took all those years from August 1990, when ECOMOG went into Liberia, until about 1994-95, during the chairmanship of Rawlings as ECOWAS chairman, for ECOWAS now to realize that the military option was not going to work. So the only option then was Ghana's belief in the doctrine of engagement. So we would recall that at about 1994, 1995, 1996, we had the Accra and the Akosombo series of meetings, which created the conditions now. But of course here, regional politics come in. And Nigeria was not very happy that a small player like Ghana was going to take the credit for ending the conflict in Liberia. And so it continued slightly into 1996 when he had led the scene for the Abuja Accord now to cement peace. So that commitment to ECOMOG, and without Ghana, I should say, Nigeria's legitimacy, which was questioned as a pariah state, might have had implications for the conflict resolution efforts within Liberia. So Ghana's role was pivotal. And of course, we know that although Ghana was not very keen on going into Sierra Leone, it did, towards the latter stages of that conflict, join Nigeria in Sierra Leone. So a bit of the credit also goes to, J.J. Rawlings. But at the end of all of this, lessons had been learned during the conflicts in the Mano River area that laissez-faire attitude that was in the 1975 charter, where we needed to establish an allied armed forces of the community that we had paid blind glimpse of, now encourage the leadership of ECOWAS to craft even during the conflict, the revised treaty of 1993, and immediately after the conflict in 1999 to establish the protocol relating to the mechanism for conflict prevention, management, resolution, and peacekeeping. Now, this mechanism, since its time till date, has been the instrument that ECOWAS has used to troubleshoot conflicts in Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, in the Gambia, I think 2016 or 2015 into 2016, around Yaya Jammeh and co, and of course, Guinea-Bissau, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the credit about regional stability, as we have it in the ECOWAS region today, must be credited to Rawlings. Of course, not in isolation, but in conjunction with other leaders of the member states of ECOWAS.
Right. So at his funeral, as you observed, the tributes were very, very, assuring. Even people that were his enemies, and President Akufo-Addo, didn't mince words about that. The fact that they didn't see eye to eye, and then later they began to build, a friendship that they became proud of. What do you have to say? Maybe finally, if you want to make a comment about that, the era that mostly we don't like to talk about because it's controversial, that in what he did in and called it the house cleaning exercise. How much of that takes away all that he's been, through him, the country, has achieved? There are those who believe that the things that happened, his arrest, and subsequently the court-martial, the manner he spoke, someone who was getting ready to be executed, and then the manner in which he got released, how he took the fault and said, let my men go, deal with me only, let me bear the guilt and the penalty all alone. What would you say that the excesses of the AFRC or the PNDC, what would you say they do to what he's been able to build, and now, without any contestation, we credit him for?
If I may attempt to sound a bit philosophical, the evil that men do lives after them, and the good is often interred with the bones.
That's right.
So these are the two extreme sides of the character, of the image, of the legacy of J.J. Rawlings. On the one hand, he navigated Ghana and ECOWAS as a region or sub-region from very difficult circumstances to the current, climate of, relative stability that we have. But on the other hand, that process or processes exacted a heavy toll on the well-being of many, many, many Ghanaians. Whether he apologized for that before he passed, I'm not too sure. But I get the sense that either he did it or he came close to doing it, But we also need to remind ourselves of the other side of this discourse. The idea that, look, painful as the revolution was to us as Ghanaians first and foremost, shouldn't that be the raison d'etre why we must be scared of the current climate of politics that we are practicing in this country, where we don't seem to be serious about the seriousness that governance entails, as if to ridicule what Rawlings had done which we don't like, but rather use it as the basis to ensure that we don't go through that again. So I cannot speak for him, but I think all of us as Ghanaians, in a way, were complicit in what happened. Either we were part of it, or we're sitting on the lines, or it was because of our excesses, that caused this revolution to come on. So all of us need to apologize to the state of Ghana and learn lessons from that. But I think there is more about his humane side. And if you may allow me to mention just about 3. A few days ago, I posted on Facebook 4 drinks. 1 black label, 1 red label, 1 schnapp, and some very fine vodka. Now, sometime before I left as ceremonial lady, and remember I left I left Ghana for the OAU in 2000. Sometime before that, at a function at the Black Star Square or wherever, we had come to the castle, and I was about to salute and get ready to go back to Mats where, I was staying and working. And he turned to his wife, said, Nana or Nana, can we give some of the drinks to Festus or Kenela Abuaje, let's say, and then ask W1 Tete to also give him some of the cakes. Of course, the cakes, I said, went long ago with my coffee and tea. But those 4 drinks, over 21 years old, are still here. You see, I say this because as ceremonial ADC, and indeed anybody who worked with him, would tell you straight away that you were not there to make money. You were not there to expect to be paid for your services. After all, I was in the employ of the Ghana Armed Forces. So that thoughtfulness to think that, this guy has been following me, standing at attention, 45 minutes in excess when I was speaking, can I please show him a kind gesture? Now, during the funeral itself, because I was listening, I couldn't go there for some personal reasons. But I heard it said that up to a certain point in time, when a soldier misbehaved, it was what we call, I think you were a lawyer, so the summary trial, chaired by the commanding officer. He was a sole judge and everything. He was a judge and he was a counsel, he was everything. During the revolution, Rawlings thought that, no, this was not fair. This was not justice. So he changed that from that summary trial led by a commanding officer to a disciplinary board composed of the CEO still as chair, but assisted by a number of other ranks. That's one. The third one is that for all those years when Ghana had been in peacekeeping, every year there were delegations that visited contingents, wherever they were, especially coinciding with medal days. And sometimes, now I'm saying this as a matter of fact, some of these delegations will go through London or have to go through London before going wherever they were. Now, the longer the number of days that you spent in transit until you got there, together with the number of days that you remained in the mission area, the bigger, the fatter, the larger the allowances that you collected. And sometimes those allowances were more than the allowances that the officers and men were taking for staying in the mission areas for 6 months. Of course, the soldiers complained, and Rawlings understood them. He said, no, this is not justice. This is not equity. So you now traveled in transit without any allowance, and then your days that you spend in the mission area entitled you to whatever other allowance that you had to collect. In fact, the allowance in the mission area from when you were in transit, So these are some of the humane side of Rawlings that endeared him. In fact, the other one that I should mention, what we used to call the Batman, and some of us as officers must admit that we were misusing the Batmen as if they were our servants. Look, some Batmen were washing the underpants of their wives. but they were there to only take care of the uniform of the officer. So during the revolution, which was one reason why many officers endured a lot of hardship, the soldiers paid us back. And Rawlings said, okay, enough is enough. From now onwards, no officer will be entitled to a soldier as a batman. However, in lieu of the services that the batman or batman would have provided, I'm now going to give you an allowance. Till today, that allowance, I think, has been subsumed into the salaries of officers and warrant officers, who are the only ones who are entitled, I think, from warrant officer class 1, who are entitled to the services of a batman. So this was somebody who cared, I think, as many people have said, less about himself and more about the people around him, for whose causes that he had sacrificed. But in the process, the fact remains, as you said, that it created a lot of pain, and many till today have found it very difficult to forget and forgive.
All right. Thank you so very much, Colonel Festus Abuaje, retired. He's author, conflict analyst, consultant, and adjunct member, Center on Democratic Transitions, Ghana. Thank you so very much indeed, sir. And he's been sharing his knowledge of the legacy of President Rawlings, more particularly in the area of security. Of course, if we have to discuss Rawlings' legacy, we'll need perhaps, days to be doing that sort of, discussion. So we'll end it here. Send us messages about what you know or remember or wish he be remembered about, and we'll share them with the rest of the world. We take a break. When we return, we will look at the COVID situation, and then I'll introduce my guest in studio and other lawyers who will assist us with dealing with the election petition. The NDC had two applications or motions that got lost. They had a witness statement, as in John Dramani Mahama, not the NDC, had a witness statement for Johnson Esiedun Ketia. That witness statement suffered by deletion of about 7 paragraphs in whole and some of them in part. And he presently is in the witness box. How is he doing so far? We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform. Right here in the studio presently is Yao D. Opong. He's lawyer and member of the Akufo-Addo's legal team in the Supreme Court over the election petition. Thank you, Yao, for making the time to join us.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
good to be here.
This show has missed you.
Can imagine, yes.
Right. So as you can recall, Yao was almost like a regular on this show some time back. He's a very good friend of mine. We would also have the opportunity of being joined by Dr. Dominic Ayine, MP Bolga East, and member of the legal team of John Mahama. My friends Martin Pebu, Dennis J. Jumo will all join us to look at what happened in the Supreme Court. But we must be alive to fight election petitions and to seek power to rule the country. So let's check whether or not COVID is not dealing a blow on us. Joining us first is Reverend Professor Seth Aite, Professor Emeritus of the University of Ghana and retired Presbyterian minister. We'll be joined by Kwame Sapong Esiedu, pharmacist and fellow, Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana, and Dr. Bernard Tobo, who is consultant urologist, Kolebu Teaching Hospital. So let's start with Reverend Professor Aite. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello.
Thank you.
Great. So that was Yao Sapong, Kwame Sapong Asedu, correct? Hello, Reverend Professor Aite. Okay, I suppose we appear to have lost him there. We'll raise him back immediately. Now, okay, Dr. Bernard Tobo, thank you also for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed, Samson.
Great. Your lines are very clean. Now, Kwame, very briefly, where are we as a country? We know that the death toll is rising. I'll show you some of the numbers shortly. But the frightening news coming up from Kofi Anokye, for example, about as many as 9, kids, getting, infected. And then there was a testing they did for a number of patients. And out of that, almost 50% tested positive for COVID. Where are we?
Basically, I'd sum it and say we are at a point where personal responsibility has become key. We are at a point where the numbers are such that if we don't take our security into our own hands by way of living with the safety protocols, the numbers are going to overrun the system. We're at a point where the mortalities are going high and infection rates are spreading quickly. We're at a point where our reproductive number is above 1.5 now. Our doubling rate, that is the number of days it takes for active cases to double, is 6.5 days and dropping. It was 9 days only last Wednesday. So we're at a point where all our pandemic parameters don't look great. And we are being told by our health practitioners that our health systems are getting full as well. And we know, because I've appeared on other programs with some doctors who tell us that we're at a point where people are even testing positive and are struggling to find beds when even they are struggling with the quality of care. So it's not a great picture, but I also think we're at a point where we can turn things around if we put our heads to it.
All right. Dr. Bernard Tobo, you're a consultant urologist, Kolebu Teaching Hospital. In the past 2-3 weeks, when you are entering the hospital to get into your office, how does it look like? I have seen some scenes there. I don't know how to interpret them.
Good morning once again, and good morning to our cherished listeners and viewers. I must say, working in Kolebu Teaching Hospital around this time is quite frightful. It's quite frightful. I mean, we have increased numbers. There are patients, mostly poor patients, who don't have any other place to go to in terms of healthcare. I mean, when the lockdown happened, people started, seeking alternative healthcare. But those people end up developing complications, and at the end of the day, the buck stops at Kolebu Teaching Hospital. And you still continue to have increased numbers. And the question you ask yourself, can you turn them away? Because if you decide to focus your attention on COVID-19, other non-communicable diseases of, let's say, equal importance will rear their ugly head and will be in for a disaster. It's not a nice situation.
Okay, interesting. So I've come over the place about 2-3 times, and I just drive in and observe, the near no parking space, and the cars parking on the road, on the edges, and then you see patients or visitors sitting under trees and being attended to. That's what I said I couldn't interpret.
Even the cars are not observing social distance. And our consulting rooms, I must say, are not the most friendly when it comes to patient privacy, and even around this critical time when we have a pandemic. So it is more or less like a stopgap situation, solution. You can't keep people bottled up within a small confinement of space. So the best thing within our constraints is to let some patients sit outside, at least having some fresh air with some amount of social distancing. And I think everybody is waiting for this pandemic to, settle down or go away.
Now, as a urologist, how have you been processing the news about potential effects, as in matters of erectile dysfunction arising from COVID? What should we do with that kind of news? Is it just intentional so that to get all men to become very, active to observe the protocols and to protect themselves from being infected?
Something, the news about erectile dysfunction, with regard to COVID-19, it's not funny. Leo Tolstoy, I'm sure you've heard about him, once talked about erectile dysfunction being the tragedy of the bedroom, and that there's no tragedy that surpasses, that of erectile dysfunction. And he sums it very, very well and aptly. This is a silent epidemic which is developing post-COVID. The thing about us, most people don't report erectile dysfunction unless they are pushed to the wall. But it is it is something, we don't have it all in terms of the knowledge, but it's something that is coming out, particularly in jurisdictions where they have increased numbers, and so they're able to study the trends very well. What we have is just anecdotal, evidence, but suffice it to say that we're going to have issues with our erectile functions.
I'll return to you to ask what we should do then. Of course, generally, what all people should be doing, but specifically, what we should do to avoid this. I have Reverend Professor Seth Aite back. He is Emeritus Professor of the University of Ghana and a retired Presbyterian minister. Thank you very much for joining us, Reverend Professor Seth Aite.
Thank you very much, and good morning to your cherished viewers.
Great, thank you. Now, I'd like you to talk to us briefly about this COVID situation and how you think the country can better handle it. And then we will zoom in on the question of the hydrogen peroxide, which has attracted a lot of discussion because of what you have had to say about it.
Yes, well, thank you very much again for inviting me. In relation to government policy, I wouldn't be in a position to comment on that, because government has advisors who I believe are doing their job. And my focus really is on hydrogen peroxide. And I can say from what we have researched, what we have found, the evidence we have so far clearly indicates that hydrogen peroxide works. And I'm emphasizing hydrogen peroxide works. And this is where our focus should be, in addition to all the protocols that are already in place. As most of you will know, hydrogen peroxide is a chemical that has been used over the years. Our great-grandfathers use it, our grandfathers use it, we are using it, our children are using it. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly.
Can you? Yes, okay, yes. And it is used by some for hygienic purposes, cleaning of wounds, cleaning of the mouth, and so on. Others use it as a bleach, but we are using it as a solution that provides good quality oral hygiene. Now, it has been shown very clearly, and the literature is there for all who are interested to search very clearly that hydrogen peroxide, in addition to inactivating bacteria and fungi, also inactivates viruses. In fact, it has been shown that it inactivates all the respiratory viruses that we've come across so far. The MERS virus, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, H1N1, and then the first SARS virus. And it certainly has also been shown to inactivate the current virus. And 1% hydrogen peroxide is enough. Use over 1 minute inactivates the virus. And even 0.5% on surfaces can inactivate the virus. So we've applied this principle. And let me also say that even in the measures that are taken before the virus enters our oral cavity and nasal cavity to cause infection, even those measures contain the use of alcohol
we are losing Propriety there. If you can have your line, I don't know what exactly to say really, because it's clearly not your making, it's the internet. Right. Hello, Propriety. Okay, so let's.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Now, I have interacted with some doctors, you know, and a good number of them, they have so much regard for you, and they say, for once, they are concerned. You have pioneered things or said things that they are all proud of, but on this occasion, they are concerned about this particular matter of hydrogen peroxide. And for how long will anybody have to use it? And even how to measure, you know, the acceptable level of diluting it and all. Are you not concerned yourself that there may be a problem? Because as I hear, you may not have to use it for too long, for a certain period, maybe not more than 3 months. What do you say? Hello, Prof. Can you hear me? Hello, Prof. Unmute. If you unmute your microphone.
Yes, I'm here now.
Yes, are you back? Okay, the line is not the best. Let's try it again. But the question I just put to him, Kwame and Bernard, you can begin to give us an idea where you also stand on this H2O2. Yeah, so Kwame, let's start with you. Briefly, do you have any concerns about it? What should we be doing? And we are hearing reports of shortage already in the market.
Thank you, Samson. I am somebody who always goes to primary research. If there's anything COVID has taught me, it has taught me the fact that a lot of the scientific body of evidence evolves. And what do I mean by that? When it started, we were all told about the fact that it wasn't even an airborne infection. It wasn't transmitted by air. I remember coming on this program and you putting that question to me at that time, and I did tell you that based on the primary research, which hadn't been peer-reviewed at the time, there was a lot of evidence evolving that it was an airborne respiratory infection, and that the use of the face mask could be precautionary, but I was not prepared for us to wait until the evidence had gone through peer review, systematic review. Then the WHO had turned it into policy and we accepted. So when I heard what Professor Ite had published, I decided to do the same thing I did with the face masks. I decided to go to the primary research. And to the primary research, I looked for 3 journals. I looked for the British Medical Journal, I looked for Nature, and I looked for Science. Because I can't go wrong from there. And then I looked at what's called a MedRx, where a lot of the research that hasn't been published yet is put there prior to peer review. The honest truth is there's a lot of body of evidence about hydrogen peroxide being used against SARS-CoV-2. But at the end of it, the British Medical Journal and Nature, for example, say that there isn't enough evidence at the moment to conclude. Now, here's the thing. Those two same journals said the same thing about face masks. And that is where I situated, because when such reputable journals are not able to stick their necks out and say, this doesn't work, I sit back and say, let's err on the side of caution here and let the body of scientific evidence evolve. A similar thing was what my colleague, the urologist, was saying about this erectile dysfunction and oligospermia and other things that's happening with COVID. Initially, it was anecdotal. It started appearing, they said, there's not enough body of evidence. Now we know it's real. So much as I know that dilution from a pharmaceutical chemistry standpoint of hydrogen peroxide could be a challenge for a lot of people, and I am concerned that people are buying it in drones and it has run out, I wouldn't want from a scientific standpoint to dismiss it entirely and say, this doesn't add up. Because if you look at the science, is hydrogen peroxide 1.5% or 1% virucidal? Yes, it is. Is it virostatic? Yes, it is. Is that theory? Yes, it's pharmaceutical chemistry and medicinal chemistry theory. Then I look at, is the theory scientifically based? Yes, it is. Is there evidence in practice? Now, yes, it is. And I've given people the source of the evidence I'm talking about. And I'm talking about 3 of the world's most reputable scientific journals. Have they been able to make a definitive stand on hydrogen peroxide? No, they haven't. But they haven't also discounted it as well. And I situate it here because if you look at drugs like chloroquine and the others, these journals at a point were able to make a categorical statement and say, this doesn't work. They haven't made it in this case. And they are waiting for the peer review and more research to go on. So I would say that we need to also carry cautiously and not just discredit it and say that we are concerned. Yes, there are concerns about the dilution and all that, but at this point, I would just not wash my hands off it.
Right. Dr. Benato, what do you say about it also? I have been educated to know that, hydrogen peroxide is used, you doctors, particularly those of you doing surgeries, you use it so frequently. But when it has to be used in the manner that we are being advised, which Kwame says we should be cautious about and not dismiss, I'm being told that there's a certain time limit also. And even the question of the mixture, the proper quantity that you need to put in and mix with the water and everything, if we are not careful, we'll rather through this send people to their early graves.
Yes, Simpson, I side with what Kwame is saying. We can't throw the baby with the bathwater. I mean, even though the body of evidence out there is quite scanty and the information is still evolving, I mean, with regard to the COVID-19 narrative, suffice it to say, the hydrogen peroxide has been used, prior to the insurgence of COVID. I mean, you can use it very, very well in safe dilutions when it comes to even as a mouthwash or for other oral or nasopharynx situations. The challenge here, I think the information should go out, the education should go out there, because as you have alluded to, the shelves are empty. And this is the time that people are going to, make small money or big money for that matter. People will change their businesses to go and sell hydrogen peroxide. And FDA or Food and Drugs Board will have to really open their eyes, very well. The education should go out there. People shouldn't think that hydrogen peroxide is the overall panacea. We still have to observe the protocols. We still have to, social distance, hand washing, face masking. We still have to do all that. But I must say, like Mr. Asiedu rightly pointed out, even though the body of evidence is scanty, sometimes you don't have to wait till you get everything. Sometimes by deduction, sometimes by intuition. You may draw your conclusions, and then provided that the education has gone out there and people are doing it right in the right dilutions, that is what has to be hammered on. So the direction of hydrogen peroxide, I think we should explore it as the venerable professor is championing.
But are you any concerned that we are running out of stock on the market already?
Very, very concerned.
Okay.
Like I pointed out, people will start businesses very soon. Hydrogen peroxide in various imitations or what have you will appear. And there's a time that, some unscrupulous people will make big, big money. So FDA will have to open their eyes, seriously.
Okay.
I may change my job probably to go into hydrogen peroxide business.
Anyway, now, Professor Isaac, thank you very much for getting back. Right. Too bad how the internet at your end is behaving. But I was asking what you have to say about concerns raised by doctors, particularly those who are involved in surgery and other things who use hydrogen peroxide very often, and who say there ought to be a lot of caution in preaching, the use of, H2O2.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Let me say that we started investigation into hydrogen peroxide as far back as March last year. And we've waited for evidence up to now that we have escalation in the number of cases. And we think that the observations we have made so far are quite relevant for us to come into the public domain. I heard the previous speaker referring to British Medical Journal. Indeed, we published our first paper in the British Medical Journal, July 2020, and that is that is cited in the public statement that we made. If you read that, you will get quite a bit of references about hydrogen peroxide and its effect on viruses, especially respiratory viruses, including the influenza virus. What we all just needed to do was to begin to use it ourselves. Those in the team, members of our family, our friends, and so on, to see whether really it will be helpful. And one key evidence we have, and we cited it in the public statement we issued, is that 8 nurses, frontline nurses, who are working at the Dodowa District Hospital and who just use face masks and wear scrubs and gloves to manage, first of all, receive COVID-19 patients and to manage them. 8 of them have remained negative and they've been well. They haven't had COVID over the period of 9 months. Whereas those 62 of their colleagues who are not using hydrogen peroxide have had COVID. In fact, I'm at an engagement ceremony now. And as it turned, the gentleman I sat next to works with the National Health Insurance Authority. And he made a startling statement to me. He said someone introduced it to him in June last year. And he has used hydrogen peroxide regularly. And sometimes at the office, he forgets even to use the mask. But it turned out that his colleagues became infected, and he alone tested negative. You know, when you have observational, evidences like this, you don't throw them out.
Right.
And
now, Prof.
These are not just the only two. There are several.
Now, Prof, what is... Prof, what is your reaction to the concern that you cannot use this? Of course, it's for preventative use purposes, that you gargle it. I'm told that after a certain period, it might affect your teeth, and you cannot use it for so long. Is that the case? And how long, if that is the case, can one be using hydrogen peroxide?
Very good statement you made. You know, one of my colleagues made a statement, one of my international colleagues made a statement that if the whole world should use hydrogen peroxide for a week or two without break, we would make a significant progress in managing and getting rid of COVID. So if we eliminate it, and what I would suggest is that we look for the hot zones. We look for the hot zones where the disease is spreading and intervene with hydrogen peroxide, find out whether it works or not. And if we mop it up, we will not need to continue to use hydrogen peroxide for a year or whatever. No. And the concentrations we are using, 1%, is very, very low. It's not the concentration that you use for bleaching, which is 20 to 30%, in the 20 to 30% range.
So there's a science about...
What we are also saying is that even when someone has COVID, yes, and the way hydrogen peroxide works is that it breaks down into water and free oxygen molecules, which are radical oxygen species. And these species would attack the membrane wall of the virus. So once it's in the oral cavity and nasal cavity, the oxygen molecules or radical oxygen species will destroy the membrane wall and therefore make it impossible for the virus to attach to the surface, that is the mucosa, to penetrate further. If it penetrates, then you lose the opportunity to inactivate the virus. But when the patient now has COVID, the viruses must leave to now infect others. And when they leave in, they use the same routes, the oral cavity and the nasal cavity. What we are suggesting is that if someone has COVID, let the person use hydrogen peroxide. And when he or she uses hydrogen peroxide, the viruses he or she will be shedding will be inactivated viruses. So they will not be able to infect their contacts, and particularly healthcare workers. So our emphasis should be on protecting healthcare workers aside all the protocols that have been accepted to use hydrogen peroxide so we can break the chain.
Well, much earlier on, one of your colleagues, also an emeritus professor in this area, spoke to me personally, privately about this and recommended that I tried it myself and with my family. But question is, how is it supposed to be used? Can you demonstrate practically how it is supposed to be used? And in any situation, for how long? If you are going to use it daily, how do you use it? And for how long can you not continue to use it?
Yes, well, for health workers who are in a critical area, and who have a greater risk of being infected, I would say they can use it twice a day or at least every evening. Because, again, we looked at the size of all this. The virus, for a little time, gets itself ready. So we have 2 to 3 days after the virus has 2 to 3 days, and then we can get rid of the virus then. So those who are at risk, they should use it every evening at least. Yes, and I would say that those who are at risk, the older people from 65 years onwards, they can also use it daily. What we tell our friends is that anytime they feel exposed, that is after being in the crowded area, whether at church or in the market or funerals or any social event, when they get home in the evening, they should use it. And you don't have to use it daily. But as I'm saying, if we have a national policy and we use it based on the evidence, based on the science, based on the evidence, and so on, we can get rid of this scourge on the whole world in a very relatively short time.
Yes. So finally, in some 30 seconds, how is it supposed to be used? How?
Yes. In fact, we've done a little leaflet, which we posted. I'll send a copy to you. But what you do is that you take 1 part of hydrogen peroxide and add 5 parts of water to it. But most of the hydrogen peroxide on the market is 6%. So if you take 1 part of that and add 5 parts of water to it, you get 1%. And you gargle this for 1 minute and spit out. Then the 1% you prepared, you take 1 part of it and add 1 part of water. That gives you 0.5%. And the 0.5% you can use for nasal wash. But we would like the pharmaceutical industries to start thinking about producing a spray, nasal spray and oropharyngeal spray. Once that is done, you wouldn't need to use the fluid directly. So you can spray it into your nose every evening, you can spray it into your mouth every evening, depending on the concentrations, 0.5 for the nose and 1% for the oral and throat cavities.
Thank you very much, Reverend Professor Aite, for joining us to explain your point about hydrogen peroxide. Let me go and end with Kwame and Bernard. Now, Kwame, listening to him and Bernard, both of you, if I'm listening to Prof now and I have no idea how to do the measurements he's talking about, how to measure the water and to do the mixture or dilution, how can you assist so that the concern and the danger you preach against may be avoided?
Samson, thanks. I'm a pharmaceutical chemist by trade, so that is where my concerns come from, that when I tell someone to do a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 dilution, even when I was a lecturer in the university, in the lecture hall, students struggled with it. They struggled with serial dilution. It's one of the struggles of pharmaceutical chemistry, even when I used to teach it. So I agree with Prof. Aite that the best bet would be for, if this is a route that people are going to go by, for the dilution maybe to be done on people's behalf rather than people doing it themselves. Because the thing about hydrogen peroxide is it's corrosive as well. So if you don't get the dilutions right, you might end up corroding the oral mucosa of your mouth and your nose. But when I sit with these cautions, so basically, let me put it, if you have a measuring cylinder at home and you're going to do this, if you take even 10 mil, you've got to add 50 mil of water, and that would give you roughly the 1%. That I'm using roughly because it's not as accurate, but that would put you in the ballpark figure of 1%. But you see, when I hear scientific debates like this going on, it takes me back to the end of the 19th, 20th century when what's called puerperal fever was in vogue globally, and people were dying at birth because doctors were not sanitizing their hands after they had gone into the morgue to do autopsies and then come into their delivery suites to actually deliver babies, and they were transmitting infection, and babies were dying and mothers were dying. It took one doctor who then said that let's try and wash our hands with bleach when we're leaving, and suddenly puerperal fever was history. But when he did that, what happened, Samson? He was sent to a psychiatric institute because his colleagues felt it was sacrilege to think that they were the filthy ones who were transmitting the infection to their patients. And this is medical history. Ignatius Semmelweis, it's written medical history. There's the same thing with leukemia, with J.A. Farrar, who is the father of leukemia and has led us to this point where leukemia is a disease that is treatable. When he started with vincristine and other things in the United Kingdom, in the United States, they nearly struck him off the register. So I am saying this thing because I am not surprised when someone says something that is a bit altruistic in medicine and the general medical fraternity develop cold feet.
Right.
Because if you're like me who reads medical history, it transcends medical history even up till this day. As I talk now, there's a doctor who is the father of technology in medicine, who is saying that the stethoscope should be shunted and they should use handheld ultrasounds. The same thing is happening to him. You can go and look for his book, Deep Medicine, and read as well. So in healthcare, these things happen because we are not very used to radical change.
Right.
We're used to the status quo and tweaking.
Right. Kwame, in a minute or two, what do you have to say about the new preaching to double the mask? And that's the surest way, doubling the mask.
Yeah, the thing I would say is that the data coming out means that these new variants have evolved to be much, much smaller than what came from Wuhan. And so some are thinking they are penetrating the mask, and that is why when certain people are wearing the mask and doing everything, they are still getting infected. The truth of the matter is doubling the mask is an issue when you are not using the right set of masks. But with the surgical mask and the other sets of masks, you can do that. But if you use it properly, you still are safe. The concern I would have would be with the handmade masks, and probably the fact that even with the handmade mask, if you are using the one from FDA where the technology has been applied properly, I wouldn't be too concerned. But to be sure, doubly sure, with the way the variants are going, I've just put out something from the African CDC, which is saying the variants are all over the place, including Ghana. You need to be very cautious. Wash your hands. If you have to double the mask, double it. But most importantly, wear the mask at all times. Right.
Do you have any expectations if the president, hopefully, is it tomorrow or Sunday, wants to make a broadcast? What, at least two major things would you expect? There are some who suggest that we should get back to shutting schools, not going to church and all that.
You see, Samson, I've always said when the schools reopen that we cannot keep our children away from school forever. But I also acknowledge that when you open schools, you increase mobility. And like it's always been said, you move, this virus moves. When we were kids, there was a game called Stay. That's what the virus is playing with us. If you say stay and you stand there, you're safe. But if you move, you put yourself at risk. So I would want that the president would try and cut down on mobility. Even if the children are still going to go to school, we need to look at mobility around churches, funerals, and all those things. We need to look at the number of people who go to these facilities, mosques, and all those things. That is one thing that I think we need to look at because we need to decrease the human interaction. The other thing I would want to look at is restrictions around the number of people who are going into our public transport. Because at the time when the easing of the restrictions on public transports were made, it was said that because of the air and the ventilation in most of the trotters, because the windows
from day one,
the chances are lower. The reality of the matter is with these new variants, they are 50 to 70% more contagious. So that makes proximity a very, very important issue. The closer you are to people, the more likely this will deposit on your oral or nasal mucosa, and then you might get infected. So those are the two things I would want to be looked at. Mobility across the country, non-essential mobility. When I say non-essential, some people say, but for me, church is essential. But when you're dealing with a pandemic, essential is the things that directly impact on our economy, our labor force, etc. And I think education is one of them.
All right.
So those are the two things I'd want to say.
Thank you very much, Kwame Sapong-Osiedu, for always coming through and assisting our country with your knowledge and expertise on how to navigate this COVID situation. Now, Bernard, I'll finish up with you. If you have anything to say about the hydrogen peroxide, let's hear that comment. Then I'll ask you a couple of questions, and then you conclude also on the, if you like, the urological question, the erectile dysfunction, because we didn't finish on it.
Yes, quickly on the hydrogen peroxide, I hold a view that it shouldn't be a crusade championed by the venerable professor alone. We should have other agencies, the Ministry of Health, the Ghana Health Service, even GMA. We should all act in concert to, look more into it and to bring out a specific protocol and then educate our public. I stand for the view of us having, already diluted preparations on the market instead of leaving people to do their own dilutions. Because, look, if somebody has an itch in the throat, he takes 1 in 10 dilution and it's not going. It's going to double it. I mean, that is the problem with, people taking alternative medications or herbal medication. They multiply the amount they take in, and then with its attendant side effects. So I think we should look at it critically. Let's all work in concert, the pharmaceutical industries, so that we can bring out well-diluted products in the market.
Have you also known about it all this while, and have you been on it? As I said earlier, I was told about it quite long ago. It was a whisper to me privately.
I actually use it as a mouthwash regularly.
Okay.
Some of my family members usually have this tonsillitis or throat issues before even COVID. So for us, we've been using it as a gargle, and it worked. But like I said, we still need a body of evidence. We still need to gather our data.
Yeah. Now, knowing the statistics as far as COVID is concerned in this country, what will be your expectations when the president speaks? We have seen the Ghana Medical Association now being very much upfront and being blunt and telling us what has to be done. Your colleagues at Komfo-Anokye Hospital, particularly led by Dr. Pakwesi Beidu, very blunt about the issues and the cautions that we have to take and everything. What will you expect the president to be doing?
Well, if we want to look at all the figures that are coming out, the most plausible or knee-jerk reaction will be another lockdown. But you need to situate it very well. I mean, the social impact, economical impact here and there. So I wouldn't, ask for a lockdown per se, but maybe a more tighter restriction. Let's crack the whip. When the president announces whatever and empowers the police, what have you, within the first few days, you see them, with so much zeal acting, then everything fizzles out. Let's sustain the punitive measures. Let's sustain it. Let's push it and let education still continue. Let's, observe the protocols. I wouldn't call for a lockdown per se, but to enforce the rules very well.
All right. So we understand that the issue of erectile dysfunction effects of COVID, though rare, may not be worse. And we actually are hearing also of COVID-related psychosis. And we understand there are some people actually under observation now. So tell us what to know about the question of erectile dysfunction and if you know anything about this COVID-related psychosis.
You know, initially, I mean, COVID was thought to be purely respiratory. And then the body of knowledge started increasing, and now we know that it is multi-systemic. It affects virtually every system, and the erectile function is no exception. As a matter of fact, when you look at erection, it is an interplay between three different systems. The cardiovascular made up of the heart, the blood vessels, that's one. And then two, the neurological made up of the brain and the nerves. And then the hormones, of which the headquarters of production of testosterone is the testes. And COVID has been found from the body of knowledge we have now to, if I'll take the cardiovascular, the blood vessels tend to be narrowed by clot formation, what we call microthrombi. Not only that, the inner lining of the blood vessels also gets affected, and it affects its ability to relax, for blood to flow through, to have a firm erection. The heart by itself is affected by the inflammation, and its pumping activity, it's deregulated. So all these things act in concert. The neurological, of which the brain is the chief center. In fact, psychologists refer to the brain as a primary sex organ. What you have down there is just a representation of everything upstairs. So if the brain goes whack, and looking at what COVID is bringing, I mean, people are likening it to what we call a post-traumatic stress disorder. Conditions akin to what happened post 9/11 or any major disaster like earthquakes and what have you. And the body of knowledge is still increasing. A whole host of neurological brain disorders, from psychosis, delirium, anxiety, depression. Once the work of the brain is affected, the brain has to trigger desire before the electrical activity in the nerves are triggered, and then the blood vessels respond, what have you. So once the brain is affected, then it can impact negatively on the erection. Coming to the testes, the virus-based inflammation has been found to depress the production of testosterone, and not only that, even sperm production. And that also impacts negatively on erectile function.
All right.
So you have these three systems acting in concert. The last thing I'd like to say, you see, the erectile dysfunction being brought up by COVID may be a surrogate marker or a pointer to an already existing problem with your health altogether. For instance, it's been found that people who have erectile dysfunction actually might have had problems with their blood vessels or even with the heart, which might predate even 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So COVID is just bringing out what is already simmering downstairs.
All right.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much. Dr. Bernard Tobo is consultant urologist, Kolebu Teaching Hospital. Thank you all so very much. Now, there was one thing that ran through every expression or statement that Prof. Saite, even Prof. Saite himself, who is said to be the lead preacher of this hydrogen peroxide, and also Dr. Bernard Tobo, as well as Kwame Sapon Asiedu, you heard them. The caution must be observed. Already we understand that we are running out of stock of 82802 in the market, on the market, and that's not a good sign at all. For them, their preference will be that the thing, is finalized at the pharmaceutical end, even if it has to be recommended so much for use, so that, Otherwise, there are problems. And I needed to let you understand that as well. And remember, there are many doctors like them who disagree, who at this point say this is not the way to go, not at all. Right, we will take a quick break, return to the Supreme Court. But remember, this show is brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Duraflas, where Duraflas goes, water flows. Having mosquito spray and coil. Pleasant on humans, tough nightmare on insects. And Napa Foods, it's tasty. DBS Industries. Robert & Sons Limited, Optical Services, your comprehensive eye service provider. We'll be right back, getting into the Supreme Court. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on NewsFile, we put Ghana first. It's brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Duraflas, where Duraflas goes, water flows. Having mosquito spray and coil, pleasant on humans, tough nightmare on insects. And Napa Foods, it is tasty. DBS Industries and Robert & Sons Limited Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider. Now, we are going to the Supreme Court to check how far Johnson Asiedun Katia, who is testifying for John Mahama, is doing. Let's listen to him briefly, and also Frank Davis, who is one of the lead lawyers for Nana Akufo-Addo, and Dr. Dominic Ayine, who is also part of the team for John Mahama.
To you that you are wrong, because the current situation is the reality. The court deals with reality, not conjecture. I'm suggesting that to you.
My Lord, the current situation cannot be the reality, because nobody knows the results of the presidential elections in 2020. Nobody knows in exactitude how many votes each of the candidates got and what percentage each of the candidates got.
It is not true that the first respondent padded any votes, as you allege. I am putting it to you.
My Lord, I decline that assertion.
Now, sir,
we are not in court to try to declare another presidential results by us. We are in court to challenge the performance of a constitutional duty of a first respondent, and to see whether that duty has been discharged faithfully.
If that is so, then I'm suggesting to you that you are not, by your own showing, you are not in the right forum.
I decline that, my Lord.
Played out so that we can properly confront the witness with his own acts and that of the petitioner, together with leading members of his party, on the issue whether or not they declared to the Ghanaian public that petitioner had won the election.
These are persons who, after or during the course of the elections, had proclaimed to Ghanaians. In fact, the presidential candidate himself, John Dramani Mahama, the General Secretary, John Siase Dunketia, the Deputy General Secretary, Otokuno, the Director of Elections, Evisafi Ankra, and their communication officer, Sami Jemfi, had proclaimed to the whole of Ghana and the world that their presidential candidate had won the presidential elections, and they had secured, some were saying 140 seats in parliament, others were saying 141, others were mentioned that they were not even sure. And when they proclaimed that they had won the presidential elections, they gave you percentages. Don't pretend as if you didn't hear. They gave percentages. And some of them were calling the presidential candidate president-elect. I think I recall Sami Jemfi, a communication officer, referred to Mahama as the president-elect. Some of them even urged him to form a parallel government. Now when they are being invited to the police, there's another story. They advised him to run a parallel government because they had won the elections. Now these are the same self-people who now, when come to court, cannot even tell how many votes they garnered and are asking for a rerun. Does that sit well with you? And you think it sits well with Ghanaians? No.
We want the unconstitutional conduct of Jean Mensa to be held to account. Secondly, we want the court to declare that none of the candidates met the threshold requirements of Article 63, Clause 3 of the Constitution. That is the crux of our case. And that is the case that we have sought to make in court today with the witness statement of the General Secretary of our party. Now, it is far from being the case that John Dramani Mahama himself must testify in this matter. He has filed a petition. He is entitled as of right under the law to call witnesses in aid of his case, and that is what he has done.
So you had Frank Davis, former president of the Ghana Bar Association, Accra. We used to call him the Mugabe because he was president for a long time. And then Dominic Ayine, former Deputy Attorney General, and he's MP, Bolga East, and a member of John Mahama's legal team. As I introduced to you earlier, Yao Pong is right here in the studio. He is member of Akufo-Addo's legal team. Joining us via Zoom, Martin Pebu, a private legal practitioner. He's a rights activist, has led a number of major reforms in our legal system. And Dennis Ejay-Jumo, also a private legal practitioner, has an interest in the juvenile justice system and doing a lot of work in that area. Good morning and welcome to you guys.
Morning.
Good morning, Sam.
Great. Hello, Dennis. Let's test your microphone.
Good morning. I hope it's okay.
Great. Okay. So, Dennis, do you feel that the NDC or the John Mahama's lawyers are somewhat vindicated by what transpired yesterday? I want us to start on that note. That they said that according to the new rule CI 99, there's supposed to be 5 days for pre-trial. Yesterday, we were in a situation where almost the entire day would have been, if you like, quote unquote, wasted on some sort of pre-trial CMC or case management matters, which should have been done earlier. What do you say?
Thank you very much, Samson. What I would say for a start is that let's all agree that ordinarily the Supreme Court is not a trial court. The trial court happens to be the High Court, the Circuit Court, and the District Court. But in terms of the court with original jurisdiction in presidential matters is that of the Supreme Court, and when it comes to constitutional matters, same is done. I quite remember when we were doing the case of Smiley Baby was Adamu Dramani Sakande, which was the first constitutional case that had to go through trial, but only that the trial was abandoned because at the point in time the plaintiff discontinued. These issues came up where the rules are not expressly stated on same. And so we should all concede that patent on the face of the rules, in terms of CI 16 as amended by CI 19, they are silent on some of these trial issues which are well catered for by CI 47. Now, the interesting bit that we also have to observe is that with regards to the Supreme Court says that where its rules are silent, it's up to the Supreme Court to determine how it will be governed by the rules. So, in effect, there's no wrong that the Supreme Court might have done in terms of its decision that it will take. And if you want to practice and present anything to go by, you realize that in 2013, in terms of production of documents, the court flatly rejected the argument that was made by the petitioners for production of documents to be produced when they made a formal application for same on grounds that it's already there where the plaintiff had copies of same. But in ordinary times, in case of high court, when we are doing trial, the court can order for discovery of documents to be done. And all these things apply. So it therefore dovetails to my suggestion from earlier on in our discussion that we have had, is that I think that it's time for us to have a substantive rule that governs election petition based on our history. So that these issues, because it's also highly political, when you have situations where senior lawyers come from court, decides to engage the media, which violates the rules, the ethical rules, because of the political interest on it. I think that, one, I don't think anybody is vindicated. I think that the Supreme Court has a mandate to do what it did, because we all do concede that CI 16 is silent on some of these detailed rules. And so the Supreme Court is the one that decides to chart us apart. But we need to have a situation. Something, I can't hear you. Hello?
Having that court say that where the rules don't provide for a specific matter, then they will decide, as it were, what to do. But should that be left to their election and discretion when there are rules already provided in the High Court rules that they can rely on? Now, but the point of the question was, don't you think that if they had allowed for the witness statements to be filed, and then for pre-trial conference or case management to be done, what we saw happen yesterday would have been avoided? Again, you see, Akoto Ampao needed to have a video played. If a CMC or case management conference is done, all this would have been sorted out. Is that not the case?
It would have been, just to be straight, but that notwithstanding, this is not strange. In previous, before we passed the amendment to our CI 47, which allowed witness statement to occur, where people had to go into the box and testify in terms of giving their oral testimony, where lawyers would get up and object to same. These were things that happened. But I do concede the fact that we have come far, and we could have actually gone about it in a better way, i.e. allowing for discovery of documents, among other factors. Okay. But what they have done, they have the right to chart their path. But we think that to forestall some of these disagreements, among other factors, a detailed rule spelled out in every detail that we have in CI 47 on election petition would greatly assist us.
The second other issue that we need to canvass is they went for a review over the decision to reject their application for interrogatories. 7 judges earlier didn't find that there was merit in that application. 2 additional judges, Justices Henrietta Mensah Bonsu and then Amadou Tanko, came and joined. So unanimous at the first point, unanimous at the second point. The commentary out there in the public is that the petitioner is not doing well enough in the courtroom. If he's rejected by 7 and rejected by, 9 judges.
Samson, you and I as practitioners will not be surprised by what is happening in court in terms of review. If you look at the statistics on the review cases that has been given detailed ruling, there, and I need to make an explanation. There is a distinction between a bench ruling where the court listens to it and decide to give its ruling there and then, and there's one that the court will go back and give a detailed ruling. Sometimes you do not have access to the bench ruling because sometimes it's so short in terms of giving it. But if you take your time and spend time going through all the review cases that has been brought, about 95% of them are dismissed. And these are things that practitioners are not surprised when you bring it. And I give a practical example. When we did Adamu Dramani Sakande in a constitutional matter, we had Justice Ebua Doche agreeing with us in terms of our preliminary legal objection to the jurisdiction of the court. So it was a 5-2 decision. We went for a review and it was a 9-0 decision. Sometimes the court even tells you that they are also entitled to make a wrong. And when they even make a wrong, it's not for you to come and re-argue again before them. So review sometimes is very, very difficult. And if you're a practitioner and your review is dismissed, it doesn't mean you did not do a good work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Martin, where you get some of these results. So it is not strange that the court, maintained its strictness when it comes to the scope of review and decided on same, so as to not allow further appeal where people couch their review.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dennis. Now, Martin, same set of questions to you. What do you make of the outright rejection of the review a second time? No, not rejection of the interrogatories a second time. And what transpired yesterday, and which leads me to ask the question, is the John Mahama team not vindicated? And is the lack of case management not coming back to hurt the court, so to speak?
Okay, so the first one, the dismissal of the review application. Sam, from the practice, and as Dennis has eloquently referred to some of the cases, it's not surprising at all that it was dismissed. But the saving grace is this: Mr. Mohammed's lawyers can ask those questions in cross-examination. So for me, from day one, I'd always said, well, nothing much has been lost. Of course, we know that. But
Chachu Chikata put that question back to Professor Mensah Bonsu. If you are saying, I cannot do it today because it is not relevant, why does it become relevant the next day?
Oh, well, Sam, but that's how the rule is always been stated, that it's expressly stated in Order 22, Rule 1.6, that if your interrogatories are rejected, it doesn't stop you from asking in cross-examination. So for that, Chachu and his students, they should have that banter. I don't want to get it too much, right? So for me, bottom line, in cross-examination, Mr. Chikata can ask those questions. So that's it. Justice will be done. Okay. Yeah. Now, on the matter
now, Chachu and his student, and the student who is our favorite teacher, said Chachu was seeking to cross a bridge when the time had not come. Don't you appreciate that point? That when they get into cross-examination, they may face a hurdle. Yeah. And that it is not as if it is automatic that they can do what they are being disallowed from doing now in cross-examination.
Yes, you have a point. Theoretically, it's possible for the court to stop Mr. Chikata, okay? But practically, you see how Mr. Chikata read the case from Yaradua, the Nigerian case. This case is not just being fought purely on legal grounds. There's also the political angle. They have come to court to ventilate, okay? There's a grievance. So there is that margin that the court ought to give them. Let them ask. as long as it's within the time allotted for cross-examination. Let them ask. That's the way they see their case. And let's not also forget, in cross-examination, a wider latitude is given to counsel.
That's right.
To conduct its cross-examination. The court doesn't interrupt too much. So, based upon these principles, I'm optimistic that those questions that they sought to ask.
Okay. Now let's go to the second part of what appears to be to be stalling what would have been a very smooth running cross-examination time.
Yeah, Sam, that one is quite a checkered story in terms of, if you look at the practice. What happened yesterday, you have it also happening in some of the trial courts, where some judges will tell you that they will not take the objections to admissibility at the case management conference. They say no, they will take it during the trial because they want to go by Section 6 of the Evidence Act, which says that make your objection at the time the evidence is being tendered. So for me, yesterday's decision by the Supreme Court to go straight into the trial and to take objections as and when the document is being tendered, it's not surprising. I've seen it playing out over there. But I also see, and most especially because of the timelines. So to be very candid, my sympathies are with the court because you see, once again, we are back to the timelines. The time is running out. Yesterday, by the school of thought that I belong to, yesterday, 29th, was the 30th of the commencement of the trial, so that we are left with 12 days. That's the school of thought I subscribe to. So
how come the rule you are referring to says the judgment will be in March, and you are counting to end it now?
Yes, so I've always said it, that I still want to stay with the 42nd day because they just said 42nd day. They didn't say 42nd sitting day.
Yes, 42nd day.
Question.
They said 42nd day, which is in March.
Yes. So
that's what the rule says.
In this context, as surplusage, it was unnecessary until they amend the rules to make very clear. Because if you say 42nd day, I can count 42 days. I don't see anything within the rules that says I shouldn't count some days. You remember, I've been making a reference to Article 11 of our Constitution, which says that if you want to make a constitutional instrument in Parliament, when you lay it, it should be allowed for 21 sitting days. Sam, my emphasis is on the word sitting days. It's in the Constitution, Article 11. So what I'm saying is that in our vocabulary within Ghana, in legislative drafting, we know how to put sitting days when we want to do it.
But Martin, the second schedule is very clear. It says timelines for determination of presidential petition. Then you have process, action, duration.
Yes.
At process, number one, you have filing and service.
Yes.
Action, there's nothing there. Duration, January. Then you have the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, then in the very final one, the sixth. So 42nd day.
Yeah.
Action, judgment, duration, March. Why the confusion?
Well, like you said, maybe look, to be candid, that's why they say two lawyers looking at an issue may not agree. For me, I've taken the part that makes sense to me. I don't need the match to make further sense.
All right.
42nd day is clear. Sam, let me add this last point. You know, in the first ruling that the Chief Justice gave, what date is that? He said the timelines are strict. Yes, the ruling on submission of witness statement.
Right.
So I see it as an indication of where the court is tilting. And then, but Sam, you know that in practice, we may come to the same thing. Good. There's this, there's a 2001, the case of ex parte PPE. In the case of ex parte PPE, it was said that when the rules give a judge a time within which to submit a judgment, and he doesn't he's not able to submit within that time, it doesn't render the judgment void. So let's say if we can conduct the trial for the next 10 or so days left and finish on the 42nd day, the judgment can come beyond the 42nd day and it's already within the Supreme Court judgment. So practically, maybe we will meet middle of the road.
All right. All right. Thank you. Now, let me come to the studio briefly with starting with Yao. Dennis has a certain concern that in the practice, Dennis has a certain concern. He says in the practice, we don't comment on our cases before or after. Why is it that in this one, there seems to be a place provided for press conference after the hearings? And you hear Frank Davis do that thing. He says 0 something something 0 9 0 all of that. Where is that from?
Well, I mean, thank you very much. As it were, I mean, you know, the law is a combination of practice and what we actually call law. And so the practice is also important. For the Supreme Court itself, or under its supervision, to provide a space for lawyers to comment on the matter, I think that it is a tacit acceptance that they may not have any problem with it. As far as I'm concerned, if I comment on a matter that has been ruled on, and Supreme Court is the final court for this matter, it's not as if it's even a high court, you expect an appeal. So that decision becomes a final decision for me.
But listening to some of your commentators, both sides, NPP, NDC, including those that have been specifically designated to speak as communication members, do you think they are doing it the way you are talking about, commenting on a matter that has been ruled on? Because you hear them actually comment on the substantive matter and perform the job of the judges ahead of what they are supposed to do.
To be honest, I think in the course of all this expression of the emotions on one side, maybe excitement when one wins and so on, there will be excesses involuntarily. At the end of the day, I am of the school of thought that I will, as much as possible, I'm conscious of commenting on matters that have been disposed of alone. We are human. We may sometimes in the heat also inadvertently refer to or make a comment or two. And over time, people have been spoken to ensure that as much as possible, there should be a conscious effort not to touch on matters that are yet to be determined.
Right. Let me get Domin to say something briefly about that. And also because you have had the opportunity to be sort of a leader of the bar from the Attorney General's department. And there are people who have expressed concerns about previous leaders of the bar because of their leadership and the comments they are making. Because there are many who are watching. There are many who will get inspired through this process to become lawyers. And they may not think that there are actually rules that govern us. And Dennis is concerned. How are things supposed to be done? I've heard some seniors say, but why are they not designating lawyers who have practice experience? But there are some lawyers who have no practice experience whatsoever. And you hear them, and it's terrible.
Something that's an excellent point that Dennis made. I think he made a point just before I walked in. And I was very pleased, to listen to him expatiate on that one. And that is because I think as lawyers, and as Yao has just said, we need to be conscious of the ethical boundaries, as well as the professional, rules that govern the way we conduct our affairs. If a layman consciously or unconsciously comments on a pending matter, and, you can forgive him. But if you are a lawyer and then you do that, all right, you violate the sub judice rule. And that is why, in our case, you would notice that we have two teams. We have the team that does the advocacy before the bar, and then we have the spokespersons who are like myself, Marietta, and Eduji and Co, who are, not doing the advocacy before the bar. It was consciously done in other, not to violate the rule that Dennis was quoted. I think is I've forgotten the the specific section.
We all know it. Yeah.
But basically what it says is that when you are the lawyer in charge of the matter, you should not comment on it in a way that undermines the sub judice rule.
You should not even comment on it at all.
You should not comment on it, at all. But of course, it is in order to, safeguard against breaches of the sub judice rule. So I think that it's important that those ethical boundaries, are adhered to. And Yao, put it right when he said, when the Supreme Court has made a decision, okay, and is now functus officio with respect to that matter, lawyers can comment on it. People can even begin to write articles, either agreeing or disagreeing and so on. Right. So the fact that in this petition matter, they have provided an opportunity. I don't know how it came about, but we have the media set up for us to be able to explain to the country what is happening. I think that is in itself is a recognition by the judiciary that this is, one particular case in which there may be the need for the, lawyers or for persons involved in the matter to talk to the country.
Of course, is the reason it is telecast.
In fact, that this said it in the Sebonsu case, the contempt case, that sometimes it is even disheartening that lawyers do not criticize our judgments enough. Of course, you use decorous language.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the also that the whole world is watching and listening. So it is important that the lawyers come out and situate it in the parameters in which the decision was made.
Right.
But not to misrepresent.
Of course. No, not at all.
As your team tends to.
Oh, no, but that would be unfair.
So let's continue.
That would be very unfair.
So there are those who are suggesting that the witness, Johnson Esiedun Kechia, may not be doing your case a lot of good by emphatically saying, I am not the witness, I am not the petitioner, I am not the petitioner.
No, I think that is misunderstood. Look at the nature of the questions posed to him, in respect of which he said, I am not the petitioner. Because those were matters that required an inquiry into the personal knowledge. Okay, the petitioner knew that he had lost. So that was the state of mind of the petitioner at the point in time that the event occurred. Now, in respect of that, Esiedun Kechia is not John Dramani Mahama. He is not going to be able to say whether or not at the point in time that the declaration was done, John Mahama knew, or even ought reasonably to have known that he has lost the election. Because there are a lot of variables that, come into play. Did John Mahama have the full complement of the data, announced at that point in time to be able to know whether or not he lost the election and so on? So if you look at the questions, it's the questions posed by counsel that, elicited those responses. So it is not the case that General is simply saying, I am not the petitioner, and therefore I will not be able to speak to the petition. He has spoken to the petition. Is it also
the case that for the petitioner not availing himself to testify and for his testimony or his evidence to be tested in the judicial process, it might have an impact on his case?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. A party to an action can call witnesses in support of his or her case without necessarily testifying himself. All right. So the course of action is available to him under the Constitution, and CI 16 as amended by CI 99. But that doesn't mean that he must, personally testify so as to sow up the probative value of the evidence that is going to be given. I don't think that is, that is required. Of course, I think there is an analogy which I have seen on Facebook being made of the fact that Bawumia was one of the petitioners and then he testified. All right. Now, Bawumia didn't testify in his capacity as a petitioner. He testified as a witness, for and on behalf of
Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo.
No, that is it. No, that
he was a party. He was a petitioner.
Yes, but Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo.
He testified.
So he testified for himself
and for the other two petitioners.
And for Nana Addo and Jacob Echebelamse.
Strictly, Nana Addo was the petitioner. Oh. I mean, if you go by the rules as formulated and the constitutional
it is only in this CI 99 we didn't regulate 2013 petition. Under that, in fact, there's even a controversy because the constitution only says a citizen of Ghana.
Yes.
And then the rules, CI 99 now says that only the person who is affected and against the one who made the declaration and the one whose declaration or who has been declared become the parties.
Yes.
So CI 90, at that time, there was no rule about who was actually. So you just look on the face of the petition. And the petitioners were three. Nana Akufo-Addo, Dr. Bawumia, and Jacob Echebe-Lamptey. And as far as I'm concerned, Dr. Bawumia gave evidence for himself as a party and for the two others. But I think it's...
So let me get you briefly on this, then I'll take our final break and return. What happened in court today, we have heard commentary that suggests... Yesterday, we have heard commentary from your side that suggests that we told you so.
Yeah.
There are 5 days for pre-trial. What was the hurry? You needed to go through all of this to clean everything before you start the trial.
Yeah. So that was, for me, sitting down and watching the Supreme Court struggle with the issues yesterday. For me, that was really very tragic because it was a missed opportunity to have conducted the CMC, the Case Management Conference, for us to deal with some of the practicalities of the trial. Okay, because as Dennis said, the Supreme Court is not your typical trial court. And that is why the drafters of the Constitution saw it fit, to provide in Article 129, Clause 4, that when it is faced with the kind of situation that it is faced with in this petition, it assumes the powers, okay, all the powers. It shall, and it's mandatory, it shall assume all the powers of a lower court. Of course, if it is on appeal, that is easier to deal with. But you are exercising original jurisdiction in an election petition. And you are referred to Article 129, Clause 4, for purposes of exercising powers, pursuant to CI 47. And you reject that. Then the practicalities arise, and there are no rules in CI 99 governing those. So you remember the banter between, exchange, between Mr. Akoto Ampao and Justice Nene Amegache, where Akoto Ampao was now trying to bring in the CI 47 regime for purposes of dealing with the novel situation introducing the video. And then Justice Nene Amegache was quick to tell him that, look, we are not applying that regime now, all right? But again, something, if we are not applying that regime, where in CI 99 or CI 16 do we have the witness statements, a process that you can file witness statements instead of giving viva voce evidence as happened in 2016.
Okay.
And I just to make a point that Martin had, raised. You see, in the High Court, usually, especially with criminal trials, when you file your witness statements, it is possible for objections to be taken to certain portions, for them to be expunged before testimony is actually given and cross-examination is taken. Now, certain judges in the High Court will say, oh, because of Section 6 of the evidence decree, until you have tendered it, no objections can be raised.
Yeah, but those judges are in the minority.
They are in the minority. The majority of judges, tend to allow for you to do that at case management in order to save time. If we had done the case management conference, pursuant to the 5-day time frame provided by CI 99, we wouldn't have been faced with the situation.
So as you move forward, there is a possibility that when you are going to cross-examine the witnesses on the other side, you may now also raise issues with some of the portions of their witness statement, and the court will have to pause and then do that before it moves on. Now, the question came up as to why Akoto Ampao will not lay what you normally know as a foundation and introduce the video, but make an application to introduce it.
Something before then. I think I need to make a comment about this case management.
Right.
The framers of this CI 99 were careful not to use the word case management.
Okay.
They used pre-trial.
Yes.
At the time, CI 87, which makes provision for case management, had been enacted. But they decided not to adopt that term as case management. They said pre-trial. What happened yesterday? Was it post-trial? It was pre-trial.
No.
These matters came up before trial commenced. And the finishing of pre-trial is just so simple.
No, but
in or relating.
No, but
that's a second.
the witness had been sworn in and he was going to start.
Yeah,
but I'm saying that nothing stopped us. And as you said, I mean, to be honest, there is a case pending before the Supreme Court where all these matters will be streamlined. I even commented it in my book. What is the status of a statement of a witness statement after case management?
Okay.
I've asked that question.
All right. You're going to read
page 9 something. So the simple definition of pre-trial is in or relating to period before a judicial trial. And because the Supreme Court didn't take the attitude of some of the judges at the High Court, I know it is emerging that unless you raise issues at the case management stage, it is as if you are bound by it. So I suggested in the book, then we should then take an oath just after the pre-trial stage, so that as soon as we go to the court, cross-examination starts. Otherwise, the witness statement, it is not in evidence.
Yeah.
And so you cannot compel me to ask questions about it. So our friend Safu Boabin has raised the issue, even though in a criminal case. It's pending before the Supreme Court. I was there when it was moved. And all the judges, including the Chief Justice, agreed that it is an issue that has to be determined.
All right.
And the Chief Justice even said that perhaps a practice direction properly so-called will be raised. So for me, once these matters came up before the trial, doesn't matter whether after oath, it is still pre-trial.
Right.
They could have used case management, but again...
We'll take a break here. We'll return to continue with Yao and our other colleagues on Zoom. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. In the next 10 minutes, we'll canvass a few of the pertinent issues for you. My guest, Dr. Dominic Ayine, member of the legal team, John Mahama, and his MP Bolga East, Martin Pebu, Dennis Ejejumo, and Yao Opong. Yao Opong is member of Akufo-Addo's legal team, and a couple of senior lawyers want me to share this, that the High Court rules don't automatically apply. Under Rule 5 of the Supreme Court rule, the Supreme Court is to prescribe where there is a lacuna. That prescription could be to adopt a CI 47 procedure, but it doesn't automatically apply. Thank you very much, Senior. Another one says, I don't think there is a need for a new set of rules exclusively on election petitions for the Supreme Court. Everything they need has already been provided. That's my humble view. And I'll share this very last one. Says that on the issue of the lawyers commenting after the case, some are doing terribly, and Davis's side has to take much of the blame. All right. Great. So quickly, you say the matter that is of great importance to you is the question of the petitioner not testifying. Why so?
Yes, basically. I mean, and as Dr. Ayine said, there is this Inria Shalbuche, Lance Adjete Abosu and others versus Kote and others. It's 2003-2004 Supreme Court of Ghana Law Report, page 420. Mrs. Georgina Wood, then JSC, before she became CJ, said that, well, a party, and let me just quickly, admittedly, in almost all civil actions, parties themselves do not testify as key witnesses. Without dispute, that is most worthy and prudent. No, parties do testify as key witnesses. Without dispute, that is most worthy and prudent step to take, where the disputed facts happen to be within their personal knowledge. Indeed, where the nature of the dispute calls for a party's personal testimony, he cannot avoid the witness box. But, she says, of course, that with but, I know of no rule of law which states that a party will succeed in his case only if he testifies at the trial.
Are you going to be quoting this in your address to tell the court that John Mahama's evidence is not tested and therefore he ought to suffer.
Unfortunately, I'm not endowed with such spirit of premonition. But the point I'm making is that said, when you take petitions, I've made the point in even divorce, that petitions in a special way are personal. And that is why, especially until recently, a petition for dissolution of a marriage had to be signed by the petitioner in person. And I've always opposed where petitioners give power of attorney to other persons to give evidence. But in a presidential election, as the practice is, and when you check, Mr. Mahama, for example, signed the petition himself. Yeah. So it is a very personal matter. And being a constitutional matter, I just came across something interesting in Kwenye here in Acha. 93-94 to Ghana Law Report 525. At 590, read. Now, to the main issue in controversy between the parties, I think it will be pertinent at this stage to remind ourselves of the standard of proof required to sustain declarations of the nature being sought by the plaintiff in the constitutional matter. In my respectful view, the standard of proof is very high since the Constitution 1992, the supreme law of the land, which the defendants have all sworn to defend, and any violation of its provisions is normally punishable. The standard must therefore be equated to that required in penal cases. This would demand that the plaintiffs, in order to succeed, must rely on the strength of their own case by proving beyond doubt, even though it's a civil matter, beyond doubt that the actions of the defendants which have provoked their action is unconstitutional.
Interesting. Dominic.
That's very interesting, but of course it does not, mean, okay, that a petitioner because he's challenging the validity of an election must necessarily, testify. I don't think that is the effect.
But something is lost, is that not? Something is lost.
I don't think anything is lost. You see, the case that my learned friend Yao cited, okay, the Ashalbodo case in which Georgina Wood, JSC, as she then was said, it will be worthy and prudent if the party, testifies. But she was also at pains to say that that is where the disputed facts are within the personal knowledge. All right. Now, look at an election petition. Are you saying that for every presidential candidate, everything that occurs within the 275 constituencies and the over 39 or 38,000 polling stations are within the personal knowledge of the presidential candidate?
Therefore, the comparison with divorce,
yes, it cannot be, because with a divorce is very personal because of the fact that you are in the relationship. Right. There's a contract binding the two of you, right, and you want that contract set aside, by way of divorce. But in this particular matter, where you are dealing with an election, where the presidential candidate, is usually not even, engaged, except for campaigning, he's not engaged in the day-to-day administration of, the electoral process. All right. All right. How can you say that those are, within the person's personal knowledge? So you take, that is why the general secretary is testifying, and your party chairman is also testifying.
Good. Let me go to. Let me go to power of attorney. Let me go to Martin and Dennis briefly. We have very limited time to go. Yes, Martin. What will be your comments? Maybe final before we proceed. And again, how are you looking to how things will pan out from Monday?
Okay, so as they've already read the authorities, there are even more. Just about 3 years ago, in the case of Hydrofoam Estate vs. Okine, another Supreme Court decision, you find Benin JSC reiterating the principle that the plaintiff need not testify. So, and even before the in-rea Shalibutri, there are older cases from the 80s and all that. So this principle is being well settled in our jurisprudence that a plaintiff need not testify. Going forward from Monday, I must say that the case is taking shape. I'm impressed at the speed yesterday in terms of how much ground was covered. The fact that Mr. Amenuvo finished his cross-examination, and then Mr. Akutuampao started. That this is good. So hopefully, as I said, I'm looking forward to the conclusion of the trial.
Right.
On the 42nd day.
And Dennis, you through your Dennis Law, publicized widely the principle that the petitioner need not testify, as was being erroneously peddled around that was so injurious to the petitioner's case. What do you have to say before we go?
Something, this is a quick one. What we seek to do is to state what the law is. As in how it will be interpreted will be up to both parties to do. So, for instance, in terms of 2013, the petitioner, in the person of Mahmoud Bawumia, testified, and the law report confirmed that he testified in his testimony. So there's no dispute about it.
Right.
What I will end in terms of concluding is for us to allow the court to work, and possibly, even if practitioners will comment on it, I think it should not be immediately after coming out of court, because when they come out of court immediately, the adrenaline is high, and sometimes these statements are made. So I will hope that the court will caution both parties in terms of their expressions that they have made, because if you look at the news report, most of the reports sometimes take the toll of the commentary that was rendered by both parties' practitioners, so that at least we can gag. And looking at the experience in 2013, you realize that most of the commentary became more friendly after the court bare its teeth on contempt issues and stuff. So I hope our colleagues who after court will not comment on same, and possibly if they are commenting, they should restrain themselves so that we don't get into that free of.
All right, thank you very much. I have just a minute to go.
Well, I mean,
you want to say something?
Let me just
15 seconds.
My point is that let us continue to have faith in the court.
Right.
That, for me, I always say that is the best gift God ever gave us.
Okay.
We have bold, fearless judges, and who will look at the matter based on the law, the facts, and of course the oath that they have taken.
You will not say any less, right?
Well, I would add that, there's a need for some level of even-handedness, as far as the parties are concerned.
Okay.
And yesterday, the court said, there should be some parity of treatment. I hope that continues.
Thank you very much. Dr. Dominic Ayine is MP for Bolga East and member of the legal team of John Mahama. Yao Pong is also a member of Nana Akufo-Addo's legal team. Martin Pebu, Dennis J are also lawyers. Thank you all so very much and have a good afternoon. God willing, next week we'll come your way with another edition of NewsFile. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini.